action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today I've caught Izzi Hays, an awfully loud introvert and everyone's favourite resident alien. Izzi is a creative strategist interested in creating work that connects with humans and the world around us. Previously a designer, now a project strategist at MultiAdaptor, they are on a mission to blend those roles, working on diversity and inclusion projects on the side. Izzi is proudly a true nerd for Google Workspace, the colour yellow, breaking both industry moulds and really tricky problems. Izzi says equal doesn't mean we're all the same. It means we're all equally respected for being different. Welcome to the show, Izzi.
Hi there, thanks so much for having me. I feel truly known after that introduction.
I love that quote. That quote's awesome. Right, our 7 quickfires then, Izzi. Mac or PC?
Mac, all the way.
London or Paris?
Oh God, probably London, but very close second, Paris.
Pancakes or croissants?
Oh God, sacrilegious because I'm in France, but probably pancakes.
Sheets or slides?
Oh, slides all the way, 100% slides.
David Shrigley or David Hockney?
Oh no. Shrigley on a weekday, okay. Hockney on a weekend.
Perfect. 2 more. Gilmore Girls or Schitt's Creek?
Schitt's Creek.
Nice. Last one. Scissor Sisters or Elton John?
Oh, somebody has tipped you off for these, I swear. Elton John.
No, we heard you were raised on both.
Goodness, the tweets speak for themselves. Elton John.
Amazing. Izzi, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much once again.
To start the show, we always like on Call to Action to celebrate the often non-linear but usually remarkable route that guests have taken to get into their careers. And I know that the commonly non-linear path of a designer is something that you like to talk about too. So could you tell our audience about that and also about your first ever job and what you regard as your first proper job in design and strategy?
Yeah, for sure. I think like most people to begin with, I had sort of a lot of different jobs when I was younger, sort of just trying to make money. I used to, in Florida, I used to sell off all of my art coursework to try and pay for things. So I'd sell off all my paintings when I was in high school there. I used to translate at parent-teacher conferences for Spanish parents. So I used to make some money doing that. And then when I went into university, I used to keep myself afloat and designing for all of the photography students. So they were very into printed editorials then. So I used to get into InDesign and do all their things for them to make some money there. But I think my first real job probably that I consider to be real at least in university, I used to give university tours, and I always joke about that now because I love presenting and people hate that I love it, and I look back now and I basically just got to go around and present the university to people, and now I wonder and I worry about how many potential students I might have scared off. But that was sort of the first legal and official payroll I was on, so that's probably the one I should give.
Oh wow.
And then in terms of my first real job, well, I guess I'm technically still in it now. So during my degree, I did a couple of internships, and then I graduated and stumbled into MultiAdaptor, which was supposed to be the first of a couple of internships, but they ended up keeping me around. So I guess I got really, really lucky, and I started there as a designer about 3.5 years ago.
And you say you stumbled in. How? Why did you say stumbled? Why didn't you just walk straight in?
So I think they actually they found me at D&AD or something like that. So I didn't I didn't approach them, so I was really, really lucky in that I just got an email one day and they were like, "Oh, we like this book you made. Would you like to come in and intern with us?" And I was like, "Oh wow, this is a big moment." Yeah, luckily they were my first internship and I really, really enjoyed it. And I had to write some emails to everybody else saying I wouldn't be able to make it, and I've been there ever since. Regardless, not as a designer, that fell apart fairly quickly, but yeah, I've been there for nearly 4 years.
Oh, amazing. But so at some stage you did actually make a shift though from designer to strategy, or to strategist, sorry. Why did you pursue strategy?
I think, to be honest, it was not an intentional pursuit at all. When I graduated, so I did a graphic design degree at the Arts University of Bournemouth. And when I graduated, I think you could ask anybody back then. I loved design more than anybody. I loved making things. I loved the craft. I was always painting strange things and laser cutting things and making books, and everything was very hands-on and tactile. And I absolutely loved creating. And I truly thought it would be forever. Um, and then about 3 months into my first design job, I just had a bit of a breakdown and it all went out the window. And I took about a month off work, and then I came back and we were like, okay, you really like the thinking, you really like the research. So I got to work quite a lot with one of MultiAdaptor's co-founders, Andy, who's our strategic director. And we literally just sort of overnight began to bring more strategy into it. And it turned out that it fit really well and it worked really, really well. And they gave me sort of a huge opportunity to do that. And so I'm very lucky in that I was just able to slip into strategy, which I know most people, it's really, really hard to find somewhere that will either let you do a strategy internship or test out those things. So yeah, I'm hugely grateful for that. But it honestly was an accident and never intentional at all.
Yeah, I think that's often the way, though, in truth, and maybe it's just something that's easy to say retrospectively, especially for me, having spoken to, I guess, lots of people who have taken a kind of non-linear or sometimes slightly illogical route into this industry that we work in. But I think that's really important. Well, I think it is. But do you think it's important as well to have that other kind of view of different types of work, albeit wrapped up in the same industries?
Yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, I don't think it's everything, and I think there are other advantages you can bring, but I think it's an easy advantage to bring in this world. That I was a designer. I sort of almost grew up designing in a way, and I have a real viewpoint and understanding of how the designers on the team work and how they think and what they might need from me and how best I can sort of give that. So I think in this regard, for sure, it definitely is really, really useful that I was a designer first. And, I've sort of been called a design strategist or a creative strategist or a project strategist, depending on the day or the client. But in reality, day to day, I think given that background, I still get to work an awful lot on sort of the creative conceptual parts of branding projects. I get to get sort of hands-on with the designers in a capacity that maybe I wouldn't be allowed to do before. So in that way, my role has sort of formed around me, which is quite fortunate. And I think having that design background really helps me to probably empathize more with the rest of the team in a way that maybe I personally wouldn't have been able to do otherwise.
Yeah, I also, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I also wonder if when you're at university, it can be quite difficult to really understand what the different roles are that are available in the industry.
Oh, 100%. I think we all thought we were going to be designers. There was one girl I remember who wanted to be a project manager, and she was very much an outlier. And we were all like, "Oh wow, you really know what you're going to do, and that's really different." And we were all like so wrong looking back, but we were really presented sort of design as the only option. And I think as a result of that, I'd like to spend quite a bit of time at the moment talking to students at different universities, doing talks with them about, there are different roles in that, and trying to introduce them to them earlier. Because I mean, looking back, if somebody had told me I could have been a strategist when I was in uni, I probably still would have said no and tried being a designer for a while because I loved it so much and I didn't know. But I also think like the bubble you're in during some sort of like creative degree, when you're forced to just make things all the time, it's almost that you're creating in such a different way to what you're going to be doing in the real world, for sure. And I think coming into any industry, a big part of that learning curve is learning about office culture and how hierarchy works and different parts of the role that you're going to have to deal with, like emails and communication, all of those things that you've really never even had to try before in university when you're just making. So I think regardless, that experience is going to shape what you end up doing.
Yeah, for sure. I also think maybe that the hearing roles or the word designer has a lot of existing meaning. It's actually quite easy to obtain and to reference even in a, the youngest of minds. But the idea of a strategist, what one of those might do, is probably quite removed and quite alien for a lot of people. But as you also quite rightly, in my opinion, say, I've heard you say that you think job titles can be total bullshit. And the truth is that they are mostly a blend anyway, whether it's a blend of office culture, as you referenced there, or it's just a blend of remit, and that strategy actually can be very creative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially, and even going beyond strategy and design, but into project management or account management or that sort of thing. I think what I believe and what I always tell students, people are asking anyway, is that in every agency or every different studio or every job or every city, like that role title is going to mean something completely different. And I think that title gives you like a rough mold of what they want you to fit into, but you're essentially you're just going to make it whatever you want to make of it, aren't you? And I think in terms of thinking they can be a bit bullshit, I mean, I think sometimes job titles have more to do with someone's age more than like anything to do with the person. I always say, and this might be a very solo belief, but it's one that I believe in quite firmly, is that the best like designer or craftsperson, they can be like incredible at what they do and what they make, but that doesn't necessarily correlate to somebody wanting to manage or be like a leader. And that seems to be like the natural linear progression in like a lot of industries like ours, I think, where you get to a certain point where you're so good at making that they expect you to manage other people. And I don't think that's always necessarily the way. And that might be very controversial, but I think,
No, I don't think so.
They could be a senior craftsperson, and then there could be somebody much more junior who's just better at managing. So I always just say the job title is what you're going to make of it.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with that last point. In fact, I recorded with a good friend of mine, Nick Ellis, who also runs a relatively small, albeit bigger than Gasp, independent agency, and we both made the same point, in as much as excuse me, people typically become good at something to a stage where they want to start a business, but running a business and managing people is a completely different skill set, and one that very few people, I think, are blessed with.
Yeah, I guess that's where true partnerships are born, right? And that's why we do to go against everything, need teams of different roles, right? Because it helps to establish whether you have the right mix of people to make something happen.
You mentioned there that you partner with one of the co-founders at MultiAdaptor. I think that's amazing, and I'm increasingly hearing about, particularly in the kind of strategy roles within businesses, that people are typically encouraged to pair up, or at least see the huge benefits from that. And then coupled with the fact that you have kind of a hybrid type job role, is that quite common in your agency for people to have that mix?
Yeah, so I think there's really 2 points there. So I get to partner up with Andy because we're the only two strategists. So we do that together, and it's a huge advantage to be able to work with someone much more senior and myself. And I think it helps provide like a good blend of ideas. And we've been working together for quite a while now, so I think we're in a good sort of spot there. But in terms of the hybrid role, I think that's something MultiAdaptor, where I work, we're increasingly believing in. That, I sometimes perform somewhat of a project management role. Sometimes I'll be involved with the design team. I'm primarily a strategist, but that doesn't mean that I'm sort of only allowed to research and write strategy, as it were. And I think we increasingly see that, designers should have an element of project management skills for them, not to detract from project managers having that as a role. But I think we see the benefit in hybrid, especially as a relatively small team. There are 12 of us, and how everybody being able to add an extra string to their bow can make us stronger and sort of more flexible as a team.
Yeah, fantastic. In fact, I've just remembered it was Zoe Skaman who, on her episode, she talked about how she first started in the world of strategy, and it was very much the way the agency she worked at operated was to partner someone often quite senior and more experienced with someone who is, relatively fresh to the job. And I heard her talk about it again recently, actually, and she's a huge advocate for that type of partnership, albeit with you and Andy, as you said, you were the only two strategists, so it probably was a slightly more of a default move, but nonetheless, it sounds very wise.
Yeah, I think it works. He sort of helps to balance out some of my perhaps more wild or rebellious thinking with, Izzi, no, this actually works, and I'll be like, but we could do something different. I think it's been a good partnership. We're also very, very different people, so I think that helps us to make the most of it.
Yeah, well, that's hugely important. And then speaking then of people being different, this is a bit of a stretch perhaps, but I know you're a fan of research and workshops and getting really hands on and actually talking with people, which seems to be something that, so many people seem to either lack the resource or the common sense to do that. In Sarah's episode, who obviously nominated for you to appear on the pod, we chatted about strategy in the wild and getting out and talking to real people. That's something that you understand to be hugely vital too. Am I right?
Yeah, I think so, truly. And I think looking back, this is when I should have known that I would have been a strategist. In university, and we were given sort of our own leeway to do our projects. I would go out to local primary schools and speak to all of the kids and go around and interview random people and set up weird workshops to talk to people from the university and that sort of thing. And everybody else seemed to think it was a bit bizarre, but I like to think that, you can't attempt to design something for like a world if you don't have any idea who's living in it. And I think that's something that we really sort of try to instill today, whether that be talking to people over Zoom or interviewing people, or even, people may disagree, but I think there's power in like a survey and just getting something raw out of people is really important. And I mean, I truly believe that the workshops and the research and everything at the beginning of strategy that's the fun part, but it's where you're going to find the things that you don't even expect to hear. I think as strategists, we're so often sort of thrown into a world that we're unaware of, be it to do a brand for an ad tech company or do an advertisement for some sort of AI company, that you have to really rely on the expertise of the people that are part of that business, their customers, the people who sort of live in that world day to day. And you're just sort of a guest there trying to glean the special things that can help you to design something that will speak to them. So I think it's almost impossible to believe that you could create something that will reflect and speak to those people without actually talking to them, whether that be speaking to them face to face or just sending them an email. I think that even a tiny bit of research is better than no research. So I'm all for the scrappy as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, and to be honest, when you say it out loud, when I've noticed when we've said it out loud in meetings, it just seems so blindingly obvious and just common sense. But it's so important. Do you think though? I mean, you're currently based in France, but you've lived. I believe this is right. You've lived in about 10 different countries.
I think it's about 10, but I haven't counted.
About 10,
so it could be closer
up
to 8, or it could be closer to 12. But yeah.
Wow. Presumably that experience of kind of so many different walks of life and cultures and contexts, that has maybe helped you in your role as a strategist to understand the variety of people and behaviors and characteristics and life.
I like to think perhaps to a degree. Obviously, I can only walk in the life that I'm sort of in, but I think being exposed to so many different cultures, be it from living in sort of a really southern state in America, to I've lived in New Zealand and countries that don't speak my language, so France, I've lived in the Caribbean. And, I think that has helped to understand that I think as people, we can often believe that like our bubble is the whole world, right? And I think actually living in some of those other places really helps you to understand that even if you can't possibly imagine it, it might be how other people are thinking or how other people are living. And I do think more than knowing anything about those places, it just helps me to think that the way that I'm looking at something or the way that I'm reading something might be completely different to how it would be perceived or talked about somewhere else in the world. I think just having really lived and experienced that will hopefully stay with me forever and help me to ask better questions. But yeah, I think just anything getting out of your bubble, though, you don't have to live in other places. I think Sarah talks about this quite a lot, just traveling places and speaking to other people and just getting out there will help you to show, just to widen your world, really.
I also think it's not even about necessarily knowing things about the locations you're in. It's almost knowing that you don't know things about the place that you are, like being in that. My own experience of living abroad pales in comparison to yours, but I have lived in Indonesia and I've lived in, I was going to say Spain, but Basque country to be more precise. And that being in and amongst in a world that felt so different, I think was significant for me, because it really did burst that metaphorical bubble that you just spoke of that can easily exist in all walks of life and all industries. So just knowing that you don't know things is also I think a key part of that.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, actually. It's more knowing what you don't know, isn't it? That's really, really true. And just just to constantly remind yourself that we don't know everything. Nobody can know that, can we? So we can't yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Do you think there's an overemphasis then on the power of data then, as opposed to actually getting out and talking to people? Because people do need to make informed decisions, and maybe it is an over reliance on data and spreadsheets as opposed to getting out and actually seeing other people and getting to talk to other people and watching other people.
I do have a tendency to enjoy the qualitative more over the quantitative, but I think both have their values, and I think, and this is probably going to be very much disagreed with, but I think once you go out there and talk to a lot of people and do sort of some qualitative research, you can to some extent like draw numbers from that and draw a consensus from that will help to substantiate it. But I think it's probably the pairing of qualitative with quantitative that makes it powerful, isn't it? I think actually talking to people is going to add a level of color that you would never get just from numbers. But I say this as someone who can't really do maths, so I probably don't really understand numbers as well as I should do. There's obviously huge power in data, and just getting some figures and a graph together is going to count so much more than no research at all, isn't it? And obviously sometimes it can be overwhelmingly more powerful if you can present a number that says 2 people agree with this and 99 people agree with this other thing. But I love reading through like survey responses and finding people's weird quotes and the words they like to use and how they like to describe something. And I personally, I find there's so much power in that, and you learn so much from that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It was a very diplomatic, but more so very wise answer in terms of needing both qual and quant. I think one without the other is has its own huge flaws. I spoke to a brilliantly smart statistician called Andrew Wilshire not so long ago, and I'm going to completely gut his words here, but he referenced data and kind of spreadsheet data as the art of concealing data, because in order to drill it down to a basic number, you have to ignore significant context and things in order to make it that simple. And that was one of the points that he made that I think was just so true. But I do think we all need to get out in the world a bit more.
It's so true, isn't it? I think you'll be looking through some sort of data forms to try and grab the numbers, won't you? And you'll have to cut out the word phenomenal before the word that you're looking to draw the data from, won't you, or something? Or you'll have to lose something like that could really help to drive out some ideas or just bring a more human touch into your research. But yeah, there's obviously huge power in seeing number, especially at scale as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. They're easier to understand as well, so often easier to sell. Speaking of which, actually, I meant to pick this up earlier. You mentioned that you never wanted to exist to sell things, but you think that now it's made you really want to make brands real. Is it the word sell that maybe you had an issue with? I say issue, that might not be fair, but I know the word sell can seem quite almost a bit dirty to some people.
Yeah, and I'm going to take us back once again, because this is like 4 years ago for me. But when we were graduating, everybody I was talking to, they were all so excited to get into branding. And quite honestly, I said, I don't ever want to do it. I wasn't interested in it at all. I really didn't want to exist to build brands to try and convince people to buy from them. And I now realize, now 4 years older and wiser, that obviously we're building brands to do more than that. It's about reflecting people who work for them. It's not just about selling the product. A lot of the times you're branding a business that doesn't even have a product or that sort of thing. But yeah, I think we all spend way too much time trying to convince people to buy things in our jobs, and I think that's the reality. But I think that's the reality of a lot of jobs. But I think also we all have the power, being in this role that we're in, to try and make selling and buying more human, or try and make it more based in truth and based in fact. And I think we have a responsibility to try and reflect businesses accurately and not just build this facade to try and convince people to engage with their product or that sort of thing. And I think we have a unique insight and power in being involved, whether it be in the advertising of something or the branding of something, in which we can get to truly know the business and the product and what they're about. And I think there's also, if we don't believe in that, we should say that and probably not work with them, and I think that happens often. But I think if you are working with a company and a product you believe in or you see value in, then you can help to communicate that in a way that will hopefully connect with people that need it.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I think there's a lot of people practicing in our industry who perhaps would prefer to be in the more kind of pure creative spaces. But bizarrely, I think from my group of friends growing up and going through college and university and all of that, I'm in the minority, being someone who didn't pursue more pure kind of artistic roles in my life, and kind of fell into, I suppose, more commercial creativity. I've always thought of it as applied creativity, and I think it's much more significant and meaningful than some of my art friends might admit. But there is always always a kind of shame around the fact that the industry sells. But I think the word itself needs to be maybe rebranded, or at least reframed in a lot of instances. And your example then about certain brands not even selling products and just making them authentic and human is exactly the right point. I mentioned in your intro that you work on diversity and inclusion projects in your spare time. What sort of projects are these?
So it's I'm not even sure if the word project is correct, but when I first joined MultiAdaptor, we were quite a lot smaller than we are now. We've sort of flexed in size over the years, but I've always been really interested in trying to build a workspace and a culture that reflects more people, and I think a lot of people agree with that. And I think we can all say that in the branding industry, for example, yes, it is very white, yes, it is very straight, yes, it is very cis, yes, it is very male. And we sort of get to a point where a lot of people have this realization that they've never worked with a female design director, or they've never worked with somebody who isn't white on their design team, and that sort of thing. And I think it's always been something that I've really believed in. I think especially having lived in so many places, and then I came into it and I was like, okay, I think this is maybe something that I could have impact on, I could help to suggest. And I think that also speaks to MultiAdaptor's culture, that I was allowed to say those things and suggest these things. So I think part of it is just we aim to do quite a lot of talks with different universities. We've done new blood workshops with D&AD to try and get more people in to learn more about what we're about. I'm really interested in sort of talking about and having conversations about the different ways we as a business might hire, and how can we hire from beyond our circles. I think branding and advertising perhaps can be quite incestuous sometimes. We're quite willing to hire people who are friends or who we know or who are recommendations. And I think I'm just really trying to do a small part in sort of helping to build both a business and a culture that is more likely to hire someone who doesn't look like us, or who doesn't think like us, or somebody from a different background, or somebody who doesn't even have a design degree or has never thought about advertising, and just really trying to build out a business and an industry, I suppose, that is more reflective of the people that we're trying to build brands for. Because at the moment, you can't build a brand for someone who doesn't look like you, or doesn't act like you, or doesn't sound like you, because you don't really know anything about them. So I think you have to have a diverse team if you want to build diverse brands and products, really.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. How do you so in your workshops and the talks, how do you recommend that people do actually implement something just to make it more effective, their own hiring beyond their own circles, and hiring beyond those who are reflections of themselves? Are there any tips that you can share that you talk of?
Yeah, so I think, and this is shouting out to other people, but I think there are so many great sort of job boards out there at the moment, or directories of different people who design or create things that you can just go out and find with very little effort. So there are different directories of Black women who design, or Latinx who design, and there are all sorts of different things that you can just go out there and find different people who you probably wouldn't find from your own LinkedIn bubble. Or there are great job boards that specifically target people who are looking for a job in an LGBTQ friendly company, or that sort of thing. And I think just going beyond maybe posting within our blogs in the industry, or just sharing things on LinkedIn that aren't likely to reach beyond your within 2 friends connection worth of people. I think just making sure to try and get your job advert out into a place that you perhaps wouldn't have thought of. You're just going to be able to connect with so many more people.
Funny enough, we spoke to a wonderful guy called Doug Melville, who at the time was TBWA's first chief diversity officer. He's since started a new role elsewhere. But one thing which he did, I think it was 2, maybe 3 years ago, was he launched something called One Sandbox, which in my idiotic British English mind didn't realise was essentially one sandpit. But effectively the name being that everyone in the same sandbox. But it's it's a source for diverse companies, all sorts, news events and various other ways of it manifesting online, but crucially to connect and help hiring processes and look to bring in diverse vendors in the creative space. And it has been hugely successful. The last time I checked, over, I think, $200 million worth of recruitment and businesses or business has been awarded via One Sandbox. But there are certain things like that which do exist. It's just knowing that they exist and actively seeking them out to make it part of your business's process.
I think so, for sure. And I think secondary to my point there, instead of just looking to hire different people, I think we all have to think, and I think this is a conversation that's coming up more and more, that this realization that the reason our industries look like this is because younger people aren't afforded the opportunity to think that they could be a part of this world. I think that's because it looks the way that it does and it sounds the way that it does, and you never think that you could belong in it. So I think it's almost becoming a responsibility of people to engage more with university students, even younger students, even people who aren't in education, and just opening up sort of the design world to them and showing them what it's about. At the beginning of COVID, I did a remote workshop with, it's a program in London that runs like after school programs for people from like underrepresented backgrounds. We did this design workshop, and it was just amazing to see the creativity that came out of it, and people who didn't know that design was a job or advertising was a job. So it's going beyond that and trying to build a future that looks more representative of the world by telling people that they can be a part of it.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Really good point there, Izzi. I'd like to ask you some listener questions, if I may.
You certainly can.
So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger. We normally have 2, but we've actually got 3 for you. So we'll start with Yuri. Yuri asks, do you have any advice for graduates who may not be sure where their career might be going or where it might even start?
Well, first of all, I thought I knew where mine was going, and I was very wrong. If that's helpful at all. So I think the most important thing is, and this is probably hard to hear, but I think the most important thing is, if you don't know, I think it's just trying to start and just getting in there and trying to do things. And I think when people ask this, I normally sort of say, I think if you can just get into a studio or get an apprenticeship somewhere or find a mentor or someone to talk to, you can just slowly begin the process of trying to find out what's right for you, what's not right for you. And I think you just really have to listen to your gut. So yeah, just getting started, I think, is the most important thing. But also, if you don't have the opportunity to do that, then I think there's a lot of value in seeking out. I'm a big reader, just trying to find, like, there's so many blogs and articles about there, like, this is really basic, but like a day in the life of what a design job is like versus like a design researcher or versus like a strategist. And I think you just begin to get a feel from that. But I think, yeah, trying to get your foot in somewhere, be it as something maybe you don't want to do, but just getting in there and beginning to get a feel of how things work is really helpful.
Yeah, well said. Great answer. Number 2 is from Anna. Anna asks, what are your favourite strategy/design apps and tools that help you day to day? So we know you're a Google fan already.
Yeah, this is quite hard, and I probably shouldn't be a Google fan because obviously they're like a huge capitalist conglomerate, but their tools have made my life very easy. I remember sort of half forcing MultiAdaptor transition to Google Slides because we couldn't deal with like handing a single PDF back and forth for commentary, and it felt like it was such a dated technique. I was like, look, we're going to move to this system where we can all be there together, and haven't looked back since. And I think, yeah, so I'd highly recommend getting the old Google Workspace and explore. Should be getting paid, honestly, at this point. But my other favorites are, as a strategist especially, I think I'm always finding things and saving things. This is very small, but my favorite bookmarking tool is called Raindrop. It's made by a really small engineer, and they respond really well to like their clients' sort of needs and wants, and it's honestly just the best way for saving things. And another tool I really, really like, I could go on about tools forever. This is the best question for me. Hugely love Notion for, like, it's really, really good for researching and maybe writing articles or blog posts, and being able to drag in all sorts of links, or you can even make it work with Figma as like a design tool. So I think just finding like the sort of tool that's going to meet your needs is also really important and really good time saver. Oh, and a classic calendar. I mean, Google Calendar, blocking out your time will save you so much time in the long run. So I think, yeah, those are my recommendations.
Cool. So that's Raindrop, Notion, and Google Calendar.
I think so.
You did well to limit it to 3.
Oh, I could keep going.
Amazing. And then, so we normally only have 2, but as I mentioned to you pre-recording, Sarah has sent one in, and Sarah's question is great. She says, the year is 2022. There are no brands anymore. There are no colours or typefaces. It's an aesthetic-free and brand-free world. What is Izzi Hays doing to make a living instead?
Hi, Sarah. She knows me too well is the question. What would I be doing instead?
Well, you've sold artwork, you've done translation, you've done guided tours, all sorts already.
Goodness. I like to think I would probably be something to do with like finding things out. So maybe a journalist, some sort of like investigative journalist maybe, or I'd actually probably just really also like to like teach young children and like help them learn things in like a different way to traditional education. So maybe one of those 2 things.
Very good answer as well. She was trying to stump you there.
I know. It's okay. I deserve it.
The final part of the interview then is our 4 pertinent posers, starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Younger Izzy, nothing is as important as you think it is. I used to think that whatever I was working on or whatever I was studying for, or whatever I was worrying about was the be-all and end-all of the entire world. And I think I probably didn't realize until like a year and a half ago that nothing really matters quite that much. And I think that's probably quite a common thing to realize growing up. But what you're doing, and especially working in branding, I'm not a doctor or a lawyer, I'm not saving anybody's life or anything like that. And yes, what we do is important, but it's never as important as you think.
Yeah. Why is that? It comes up. It does come up quite a lot, actually, that one. But it's definitely something I think most of us have suffered with. It's bizarre.
I think it's probably because we want to believe it is really important. And again, that's probably something that helps keep us all in a good place. And obviously things are important, but I just don't think they deserve quite as much worry as we always give them. And as a highly anxious person, that is hard for me to say, but I think, the world probably isn't going to end whether you're doing anything. So
I also wonder if I had this, it might be quite harebrained actually, but I had this theory about just like how relative time is depending on your own age. So to give you an example, my youngest, who is only 3 years old, she really struggled going back to nursery after, the prolonged lockdown and being at home. And the way I understood it was that lockdown represented about 30% of her life, whereas it was probably, I don't know, an alarmingly small percent of my aged life. And so it was so much more significant. And I wonder if when you're younger, because, when birthdays don't ever seem to come around when you're younger, because, if you're turning 10, that last year is 10% of your life. But if you're turning 50, it's only 2%. So I'm sure there's something with that kind of relative way of experiencing time that kind of changes as you get older.
It's definitely true. I suppose a decision you're making when you're like 13 is taking up much more of your life than the decision you're making when you're like 34, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that, there we go. I think you've built on my point. I think you've made it much, much better.
That's never happened before. Wow.
No, you added in some good science.
Number 2, Izzy, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
So I think there'll be a couple of things, but I think my main thing at the moment, and I've sort of touched on this, is I think we should ban relying so much on personal recommendations and reach outs to hire people, because I think hiring within our own circle isn't going to help us to expand it anymore. And there are so many tools and resources out there to go beyond just trying to hire or find people that way, be it even like people to collaborate with or people to work with. And I know it can be the easy thing to do to find someone on a personal recommendation if you're on like a tight deadline. I completely understand that, but I think we should stop relying on hiring from our own circles so much.
Cool. Yeah, good one. That's not come up before. I like it. Number 3, are there any books that you can recommend to our listeners? Now, these don't have to be work related. This is wide open.
Okay, I've been thinking about this. I've got a little mix because I truly love to read. So I've got a bit of both. So for the work-related ones, and I imagine some people have read this, but I truly love a book called The Art of Innovation by IDEO's Tom Kelly. And there are obviously lots of books that have come out of IDEO, but it's my favorite one. And I think it really speaks to sort of, in 2 parts, I think my favorite things about it are that it really, I'm sorry if this was supposed to be a short answer, but I'm going to go longer.
No, go long.
It speaks to sort of building a culture where, as much as I don't like the word innovation, where innovation is really allowed to happen and building like a really curious culture. And then it speaks a lot to like a lot of the products that IDEO have invented and developed over the time, and how much like first person research was like really integral to figuring out how those needed to work and what needed to happen, and how without speaking to people they wouldn't have been able to find the solution or build that product. So that's my first book recommendation. My second one is fiction, and it is called Real Life by Brennan Taylor, and I think it came out last year, but it's about a gay science student in America at university, and I just think it's very entertaining fiction read and a really good view into what it's like to be Black and in STEM at universities in America. But it's actually not a light read, but it's not very intense, and it's really good. And my third read, in contrast, is quite out there. It's called Social Dreaming. It's by Anthony Doon and Fiona Raby. It's from MIT Press, and it's essentially a book about like speculative design and like speculative futures. And I found this randomly in a library one day when I like ventured beyond the graphic design section at university, and it's about like how design can be used as a tool to create not just things but also ideas, and it can get quite philosophical and high level, and some people say it's really hard to read in one go, so I just like to keep it and just like read a page every once in a while. But they talk about cool things like, what if we could develop a solar powered kitchen restaurant, or like a self-pollinating flowers, how that would change the bread industry. I don't know, all sort of speculative questions, and it's really a book about creating questions. So definitely go in there when you're sort of sitting down comfortably and ready to think big. But yeah, I really like those 3 books.
Yeah, no, that last one sounds great. Funny enough, we've had numerous, hugely talented strategists on, none more so than the late great Murray Calder, and both he and in fact Zoe Skayman, who I'm also a huge fan of, they're both prolific sci-fi readers, specifically for that point, because sci-fi, much like Social Dreaming, it sounds like, explore so many what if questions and just push the boundaries of what if. And I think what if is the key and the crux of so much of the best thinking, and needs to be. So I like the fact that's come up.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, what is sci-fi if like just outside of the realm of possibility, right? It's scary because we could see it happening in the day-to-day. So, and funnily enough, people do describe that book as like a sci-fi book, even though it's completely non-fiction. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Right. No, that's great. I'm going to read that actually, because I have sci-fi dyslexia and I can't read sci-fi books. I don't know why. I've tried. I promised Murray I would try and read his favourite books, and I failed miserably. And I'm going to try and pursue it, but my brain just doesn't allow it. I can't read on, but I'm going to pursue, and I'm going to try that one specifically because it sounds perfect for me.
I'm sure he will know if you manage to read Social Dreaming. I'm sure he'll be proud.
Yeah, he wouldn't believe it. And then number 4 then is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give their reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
I will do. And I found this question very difficult. I didn't know whether to just bestow it on a person or a thing or anything like that. And there are a lot of people I could bestow it to, but I would like to dedicate this episode to somebody called Ellie Hilton-Don, and she is global brand coordinator at Google for Startups. And she came to work at MultiAdaptor as a freelance project manager. And she really, really taught me everything about sort of work-life balance, I suppose, and like really understanding how you can find your place in a business, but how it's not necessarily your entire life, and also just how you can make the most of your work, I suppose. And it was, she's an amazing friend, and it was just seeing someone who works at Google, obviously, which is such a huge company with many, many points, and that she was able to have that distance from work and let it be her best, and how she sort of taught me that was amazing. So yeah.
Amazing. Fantastic. Okay, well, this episode is very proudly dedicated to Ellie Hilton-Dom. Our final call to action is for all of our listeners can head over to this episode's listing. It will have links to everything we've talked about, all of the books, Real Life, Social Dreaming. We'll link to MultiAdaptor too. How else can they get more Izzi Hays?
Quite easily, I think just social media. I'm just at Izzi Hays on everything, because it turns out there aren't that many other IZZI Izzi Hayses in the world. So that's how you can find me.
Perfect. Easy. Amazing. Well, brilliant. Thank you for joining us, Izzi. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the pod. Keep questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram or email hello@calltoaction.co.
To action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.